Hi, welcome to episode 36 of Got a Story for You. I'm Phil Giunta, your host, writer, and narrator on this little show. And after a long hiatus, I'm proud to be back with a new short story, a detective tale called Pearl of Great Price, which was just published in this anthology, hot off the press, called Hard Boiled and Loaded with Sin, from Hawkshaw Press. It is a noir anthology, some crime and detective stories, but others as well. My story, again, is called Pearl of Great Price, and it's Murder at the Beach. As Detective Kurt Vandermoor is on the case of a triple homicide and theft of an ancient artifact off the shores of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. I hope you enjoy Pearl of Great Price. The first of the two dead men was sprawled just inside the door, the front of his shirt matted in blood from the bullet hole in the middle of his chest. Across the room, the other guy sat slumped against the couch, head tilted back and cocked to one side. Where it touched the edge of the cushion, a stream of dried blood ran down the upholstery to the man's shoulder. On the floor beside each body lay identical semi-automatic pistols. As he entered the rental house on Newcastle Street, Detective Kurt Vandermoor snapped on a pair of nitrile gloves before joining Sergeant Ileana Velez in the middle of the living room. "Who do we have here?" Velez held up two driver's licenses and nodded toward each body in turn. "Seth Manning, 37, and Dino Quintana, 34, both from Long Island, found their wallets on the dining room table along with several interesting photos." Kurt crouched down beside the younger victim for a closer look at his head wound. "Anyone hear the shots?" "No, most of these rental houses are empty this early in the year." "Then who called it in?" "A woman named Yasmin Kadara came into the station early this morning claiming she was supposed to meet these two here yesterday. But when they didn't answer the door, or her subsequent calls and texts, she became concerned and asked us to check on them." Kurt stood. "Well, from the looks of things, they've been dead for at least that long, but I'll leave that to the medical examiner. On his way from Georgetown. Should be here in about 20 minutes. Velez shook her head. "We haven't had a murder in Rehoboth for over a decade. Now we get two in one day." "Well, at least they're both in the same house, makes things convenient. Where's Miss Kadara now?" "Staying at the Beachview for the week. I'd like to have a conversation with her when we're done here." Kurt held out his hands. "This scene is too perfect." "Meaning?" "Meaning that either these two really shot each other or someone went through the trouble to make us think they did. If that's the case, it might have been someone they knew. There's no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house and no indication of a struggle. Well, if we don't find a second set of prints on those Glocks, we'll figure out who they're registered to and go from there." Kurt sauntered into the dining room and sifted through several photographs strewn across the table. Some were pictures of a small, sleek yacht called Charisma Nova, while others were close-ups of a gold crucifix bejeweled with rubies at the ends of the arms and feet and a pink pearl above the head of Christ. Kurt turned over one of the photos. The words "Pearl of Great Price" were scrawled on the back. As he reached for one of the dead men's wallets, his phone buzzed. He snatched it off of his belt holster and peered at the screen. It was Police Chief Thomas Miles. Kurt put the call on speaker. "Good morning, Chief. You might not think it's so good after this conversation. There's been another murder." "Where?" "Coast Guard was checking on a yacht about 6 miles off Whiskey Beach. They found a body aboard, shot 3 times, and we think the suspect might have gone ashore on a raft." "Anyone find the raft?" "Not yet. When you're done there, come back to the station. I'll brief you in my office. There's more to this than just a murder. It's high profile. The yacht belonged to Max Trevani from Montauk." "Name's familiar. He's the treasure hunter from Oceans of Gold on Nat Geo." Kurt snapped his fingers. "That's right. My ex-wife watched that show all the time." "We just notified Mr. Trevani's family. They're on their way. At some point I'll need to speak to the press, but I intend to hold them off as long as possible until we have a lead." Kurt picked up one of the photos from the dining room table. "What about the Charisma Nova?" "DN Rec will tow it." "Wait, how did you know the name of the yacht? I didn't mention it." "Just a hunch, Chief, but I might have found our first lead." Coast Guard boarded the boat at 4:40 a.m. and found Trevani on the floor of his cabin. They recovered a watertight lockbox containing relics bound for the Shipwreck Museum in Fenwick. Chief Miles pushed a photograph across his desk. According to the cargo manifest, this item is missing. A solid gold crucifix studded with gems. Look familiar? That picture was in the lockbox. Same one from the house, Kurt confirmed. I have a call on to Denny Clifford to see if he can shed more light on it. He owns the shipwreck museum. So either these two dead guys were aboard with Trevani, or there's a third person involved. They waited until the yacht reached our waters, killed him overnight, took off on a raft with the crucifix. They probably ditched the raft somewhere around Gordon's Pond. They could be anywhere now. I want you to take lead on this case, Miles said. State Police and Lewis PD requested our help to search that area. Velez is currently out there with Gemmel and Lanakis and a few others. Both men glanced up at a knock on the open door. A uniformed officer leaned in. Sorry to interrupt, Chief. Denny Clifford's here. Perfect timing. Send him in. The officer stepped aside and waved forward a middle-aged man with short-cropped platinum hair, electric blue polo shirt, and faded jeans. The chief stood and extended a hand. Denny, thanks for coming in. This is Detective Kurt Vandermoor. He joined us at the end of last year. The two men shook hands before Denny settled into the seat beside Kurt. Any leads on Max's killer? We're working on it. How well did you know Mr. Trevani? Kurt asked. We were like brothers. Max and I went on shipwreck dives together all over the world for almost 30 years before I opened the museum. In fact, he was coming here to donate one of his recent finds, a gold crucifix recovered from a wreck in the Alboran Sea. That's why I called you, Miles said. Coast Guard found a lockbox half filled with small relics, but the crucifix was nowhere to be found aboard the yacht. So it was stolen? Seems likely, Kurt nodded. What can you tell us about it? Other than the fact that it was named for one of Christ's most famous parables, it's worth nearly $20 million. Denny picked up the photo from the chief's desk. This crucifix dates back to August of 1415, when King John of Portugal and his sons Edward and Henry led an armada to conquer the city of Ceuta along the Strait of Gibraltar. The siege was swift, with almost no casualties. History attributes that to the fact that Ceuta's defense was caught off guard, but there were many who credited 3 gold crucifixes gifted to the king and his sons by a Portuguese craftsman. As they embarked on the raid, King John carried the largest crucifix aboard his ship, while his 2 sons each carried a smaller one aboard theirs. King John's was the only one adorned with jewels. Over time, all 3 crucifixes were lost at sea. The 2 smaller ones were recovered in the Indian Ocean in the 1980s, but of course, they're only worth about $3 million each. Only, Kurt said. I'm in the wrong line of business. I've had those 2 on display in the museum for years, but this summer, Max and I plan to exhibit all 3 crucifixes at once. It would be the first time they were together in over 600 years. If we find it, we'll let you know, Miles said. But keep in mind that it's evidence in a murder investigation. You'll need to postpone your exhibit. I take it this thing was insured? Kurt asked. Absolutely. And I suspect you'll hear from an insurance investigator before the day is over. An hour later, Kurt trudged across the cool sand toward a relic of a more recent era. The Delaware coast was home to a series of concrete fire control towers constructed during World War II to prevent enemy ships from invading Delaware Bay. The majority of them had weathered time and tide to remain standing 7 decades since. 2 in particular, Towers 5 and 6, have been built 300 yards apart like twin sentinels along Whiskey Beach between the sea and Gordon's Pond wildlife area. As Kurt approached Tower 5, Velez met him halfway. We can call off the search. A bunch of kids managed to dig their way under the door and into the tower. They found this. Velez gestured toward a partially deflated raft lying in a crumpled heap on the sand. We got here just as they were digging it out. So the scene's been contaminated. Unfortunately. She handed Kurt a pair of nitrile gloves. After slipping them on, he crouched down and unfurled the raft until his fingers found a series of long gashes that just happened to slice through the name Charisma Nova. Kurt glanced up at Velez. Did these kids happen to find any? She thrust 2 plastic and aluminum ores toward him. How about a solid gold crucifix encrusted with precious gems? Velez shook her head. Didn't think so. Kurt nodded toward the tower where several other officers were milling about. Let's take a look around. How do these kids get inside the tower? I thought the entrances were sealed. Well, they are. But years of high tides deteriorated the bottom of the sheet metal, creating a gap. Yeah, so I see. They stopped in the shadow of Tower 5, where a trench in the sand vanished beneath the rusty, corroded door. It was nearly large enough to allow an average adult to crawl inside. Kurt pointed at Tower 6 to the north. What about that one? Same thing? Yep, kids get in there, drink, smoke weed, graffiti the walls. Well, now you got me curious. He leaned forward to peer beneath the door. Think I can fit under there? Velez held out one of the oars. You'll need to dig a deeper trench. Kurt ignored the laughter from the officers gathered around them. I'll bet you a drink I can squeeze under there. You're on. He lowered himself to the sand and slipped his legs under the door. With a final glance at Velez, he wiggled his upper body through the shallow gap. A moment later, Kurt stood inside the tower. You owe me a drink, Velez. See anything interesting? Well, just a few cigarette butts, some trash, innocuous graffiti. High above, sunlight from a series of narrow rectangular windows, spaced evenly apart, illuminated 3 levels of circular wooden platforms, floors that hadn't endured the weight of a human being in generations. Surrounding him, more such windows, barely wider than his arm, had been sealed with brick and cement, with one exception. The top half of the window to his immediate right was unobstructed, permitting a modicum of sunlight. Velez, slide one of those oars under the door. Kurt grabbed the contoured blade as soon as it appeared. Got it. After a moment, Velez stood at the window. You're blocking my light, Sergeant. She stepped to one side. What are you looking for? Buried treasure. You can't be serious. Whoever took that crucifix is in the wind. Call it a hunch. Kurt poked the oar's shaft into the sand a few times before striking something solid directly beneath the partially sealed window. Flipping the oar over, he dug frantically with the blade before reaching into the hole. A moment later, he thrust an empty beer bottle through the opening in the window. So much for that. Hey, Velez, recycle this, will you? Kurt stood outside the tower, brushing sand from his clothes with one hand, while pressing his phone to his ear with the other. Well, the raft confirms that someone else was definitely aboard Trevani's yacht. I asked Velez to contact Montauk Beach Marina. Maybe someone there knows who accompanied Trevani yesterday, or if we're lucky, they have security footage. Good. Keep me posted, the chief said. One last thing. Denny was right. You're about to get a visit from an insurance investigator. Her name's Brenda Lambert. She showed up at the station a few minutes ago, so I sent her your way. Kurt turned in the direction of the parking lot to find a petite woman scurrying onto the beach, clutching a black portfolio in one hand and carrying a pair of suede pumps in the other. She about 5'4", strawberry blonde, wearing a pale green blouse and jeans? That's the one. Be careful, she's a barracuda. No worries, Chief. I may be new to Rehoboth, but this ain't my first time swimming with sharks. I'll be in touch. Kurt lowered his phone and stepped forward to greet the woman. Good afternoon, ma'am. Please don't call me that. It makes me feel old. Chief Miles said I would find Detective Vandermoor here. And here I be. She tucked her shoes under her arm and extended a hand, followed by her business card. Brenda Lambert, investigator for Coastline Insurance. Kurt glanced at the card before slipping it into his shirt pocket. Yes, I was warned you were coming. What can I do for you, Miss Lambert? My company sent me out here when we were informed of Mr. Trevani's death and the subsequent theft of a highly valued artifact from his yacht. Brenda produced a photograph from her portfolio. It's called the Pearl of Great Price. Worth about $20 million. You know, that's the 3rd photo of this thing I've seen today. Maybe 3rd time's the charm and we'll actually find it. Got any leads? Kurt swept his hands over the raft. We have this. It's from the Charisma Nova. You found it in the tower? Yes, ma'am. So the murderer took the crucifix, fled the yacht on this raft, and came here. Looks that way. What's your next step? Find out who it was. Brenda's shoulders slumped. Okay, look, I get it. You don't want to deal with me, but we need to work together to find... Look, lady, there's more to this than some expensive insurance claim. This is a murder investigation. First of all, sir, please stop cutting me off when I'm talking. Secondly, I appreciate the sensitive nature of this case, but Mr. Trevani's decision to transport a multi-million-dollar artifact on his private yacht without any security beyond a couple of Glocks was reckless, to say the least. If he had made proper arrangements, there wouldn't have been any murders. Kurt folded his arms. You're going to be a pain in the ass until we find this thing, aren't you? Just doing my job. Then let me do mine. Fine. So let me ask again, Detective. What's next? I need to question a woman named Yasmin Kadara at the Beachview Hotel. Was she on the yacht with Max? I don't know. That's why I'm going to question her. As Kurt reached the top of the stairs at the Beachview, all irritation toward his unwelcome sidekick faded at the sight of two toned, bronzed gams topped by a perfectly round pair of Daisy Dukes. The young woman stood barefoot on the concrete promenade, hunched over the railing that overlooked the empty pool below. She took a long drag from a cigarette and flicked the ashes into a paper cup. Her slim face was partially concealed by a leonine mane of disheveled chestnut hair that cascaded over her shoulders and back as she drew herself to her full and considerable height. After wiping her eyes with a finger, the woman turned away from the railing, revealing a yellow tank top that left even less to the imagination than her shorts. Kurt nearly dropped his ID as he pulled it from his pocket. Beside him, Brenda cleared her throat, which served the dual purpose of snapping Kurt back to the task at hand and gaining Miss Kadara's attention. She looked from one to the other with swollen gray eyes and dropped her spent cigarette into the cup. Yasmin Kadara? Kurt held up his badge as he introduced himself and Brenda. You're here about Seth and Dino. I already heard the news from their families. My phone's been on fire all morning with calls and texts from people asking me what I know about their deaths. Kurt gestured toward her room. May we go inside? Sure. Yasmin entered first and dropped onto the couch by the window, while Kurt and Brenda took seats at the table just inside the door. Yasmin rubbed her eyes and sniffed. Sorry, I know I look like shit right now. How can I help you, Detective? Brenda handed her a box of tissues from the table. So I understand you're from Smyrna. Did you drive down? Yasmin shook her head as she accepted the box. Took the bus. 2 of them, actually. Brenda glanced at Kurt. Your turn. He shot her a sidelong glance. Although he had briefed Brenda on the way to the hotel, Kurt made it clear that he would be the one to ask the questions. Well, how did you know Seth and Dino? We grew up together. I'm originally from Long Island. My family moved to Delaware when I was 15. I fell out of touch with the guys for a while until I found them on Facebook. A few months ago, Seth mentioned that he and Dino were coming to Rehoboth this week on business. Seth's uncle owns the house they were staying in. They invited me to join them. What kind of business? They were working with a local museum on a new exhibit. Brenda leaned forward. Did they mention the name Max Trevani? Sure, they worked for him. Seth said that Max was bringing a new artifact down to the museum and that I might get the chance to meet him. You've never met Mr. Trevani? That's correct. Brenda held up a photo of the crucifix. Do you recognize this? Yasmin shook her head. No. It's beautiful, though. Is that the artifact? Brenda opened her mouth to respond until Kurt nudged her foot with his. Would you mind if I looked around? You have the right to refuse, of course, in which case I would probably return with a warrant. Yasmin's eyes widened and she sat ramrod straight. Am I in trouble? I didn't do anything. Like I told Officer Velez, I didn't even enter the house. It was locked. Kurt held up a hand. You're not under suspicion right now. But allowing a brief search would help ensure that you stay that way. Yasmin shrugged. I have nothing to hide. Thank you. Kurt donned a pair of nitrile gloves and moved from chest of drawers to closet to bathroom before peering under the bed. Yasmin stood by the window as he searched beneath and behind the couch. Finally, he pulled off the gloves and shoved them back into his pocket. All good. Thank you for your time, Miss Kadara. How long will you be in town, just in case we have more questions? I'm here for the week. Will you please keep me informed if you find out anything about Seth and Dino? Oh, I'm sure we'll speak again. You didn't think she'd be dumb enough to keep the crucifix in her room? Brenda asked as they walked across the parking lot of the Beachview. Kurt shook his head. So now what? Wait here, I'll be right back. He made his way into the lobby and presented his badge to the middle-aged woman at the reservation counter. I have a question about one of your guests, Yasmin Kadara in room 212. Can you tell me if she registered a car? The woman flipped through a small stack of paperwork and pulled out a sheet. No, actually she didn't. Were you here when she checked in? No, she came in late after we closed. We left the room key and paperwork in the mailbox for her. I see. Thanks for your time. Outside, Kurt found Brenda sitting on a bench scrolling through email on her phone. She looked up as he approached. What'd you find out? Now, at least one part of Miss Kadara's story was true. She didn't drive here. I noticed bus schedules in her room, but anyone can get those. You think she lied? That she came here with Max on his yacht? Not sure yet. Can't think on an empty stomach. Kurt glanced at his watch before nodding toward Gus and Gus Hamburgers across Wilmington Avenue. How about lunch? My treat. This is all too surreal. Ancient artifacts, 3 men killed, that raft inside the tower. Brenda paused as the waitress brought their drinks. Even after the girl was out of earshot, she lowered her voice. Even the name of the thing, Pearl of Great Price. It's like something out of an old movie. The only thing missing is buried treasure. Kurt swallowed a sip of iced tea. It's a unique case, but I believe we're close. Close to finding the crucifix? Who has it? I don't have enough evidence yet, and I don't want to risk accusing the wrong person. He pulled his buzzing phone from his belt holster. Excuse me, I need to take this. He pressed the phone to his ear as he slid out of the booth and hurried toward the boardwalk. Velez, what do you got for me? Well, first, the Glocks that killed Manning and Quintana were registered to Max Trevani. Secondly, the manager of the Montauk Beach Marina confirmed that Trevani did bring a guest aboard his yacht for the trip to Fenwick. They didn't recognize her, just figured she was one of Trevani's trollops of the week, but they did get one decent close-up on their security cameras. Can you send it to my phone? On its way. A moment later, Kurt stared at the picture. Damn, that's disappointing. She sure fills that bikini nicely, though. Do you have enough for an arrest? Not yet. You got any plans tonight? You want that drink I owe you? Later. I need your help to chase down a hunch. What else do I live for? Thanks, Velez. The waitress had delivered their sandwiches by the time Kurt ended the call and rejoined Brenda in the booth. New development? With another case. I hate to eat and run, but I need to get back to the station as soon as we're finished. How about if we regroup tomorrow morning? Sure. Just tell me one thing. Do you really suspect that woman? Brenda waved in the general direction of the beach view. Kurt slumped back against the cherry-red vinyl seat and wiped his mouth with a napkin. I'd say the woman is high on my list. Silhouetted by the lights from the Rehoboth boardwalk in the distance, Tower 6 stood tall beneath a crescent moon. Kurt stared at it through the windshield of the unmarked SUV. Oh, my first beach stakeout. This is wild. In the driver's seat, Velez drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. You sure about this hunch? She'll be here, trust me. Kurt glanced at the dashboard clock. It was 10:31 p.m. High tide's in about 22 minutes. And you think she knows that? Velez had barely finished speaking when a flashlight appeared several yards ahead, approaching Tower 6. Apparently. Kurt snatched up the radio. Lonnie, suspect just arrived. As soon as I give the signal, move in quietly. Roger that. The light just dropped to the sand and disappeared, Velez said. I think she crawled inside. Give her a few seconds. Kurt counted to 10, then raised his radio. Okay, Lonnie, we're on. Kurt and Velez exited the vehicle and gently closed their doors. Beside them, Officer Lanakis did the same, while his partner remained behind the wheel. The trio marched across the sand toward Tower 6. White light was visible for a moment beneath the jagged bottom of the corroded door. As Kurt and the others drew near, the light shifted, and a pair of dark shoes emerged, followed by black jeans. Kurt nodded to Velez and Lanakis. Each officer gripped an ankle and dragged the squirming body out of the tower. The woman screamed and thrashed until Velez shined a flashlight in her face. Kurt leaned forward and snatched the crucifix from Brenda Lambert's clutches. Let me help you with that. It's a bit heavy, I know, because I dug it up myself 4 hours ago. Son of a... She shielded her eyes from the light. I thought Miss Kadara was your suspect. I specifically said the woman was high on my list. I just didn't say which woman. Truth is, you gave yourself away. When we first met, you immediately assumed that I'd found the raft inside Tower 5, even though it was sitting out on the beach when you arrived. Then you said that Trevani's murder wouldn't have happened had he taken better precautions beyond carrying a couple of Glocks. Well, how did you know what kind of guns he carried on his private yacht? Unless you were on board. You were familiar with these towers, so you waited until the yacht reached Whiskey Beach before gunning down Giovanni. Then you fled with the guns. Kurt hefted the crucifix. And this. After slashing the raft and shoving it into Tower 5, you knew you couldn't traipse through town carrying a massive gold crucifix, so you came up here and buried it inside Tower 6. You then met with Manning and Quintana at the house on Newcastle. They knew you, so they let you in. You promptly murdered them, repositioned the bodies, and planted the Glocks to make it appear that they'd shot each other. Oh, that's a good story, but you can't prove I killed anyone. I admit, it was all just a hunch at first. But then we got this. Kurt crouched down and held out his phone. This picture was taken by security cameras at Montauk Beach Marina yesterday as you joined Max Giovanni aboard his yacht to come here. You planned to steal the artifact by romancing your way into Giovanni's life. Wasn't too hard, given that he never met a bikini he didn't like. I want to call my lawyer. I bet you do. You're under arrest on 3 counts of murder, theft, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. Officer Lanakis will escort you to his vehicle and inform you of your rights. The patrol officer stepped forward with a pair of handcuffs. Take her to the station. Velez and I will be along soon. Kurt leaned against the tower as Brenda was led away. I have to admit, Sergeant, if the marina's security footage turned up nothing, we might have ended up staking out Miss Kadara tonight. Did you have a hunch about her, too? Honestly, no, but she was my only other suspect. And quite the hottie. Really? I didn't notice. Liar. As they trudged back to their vehicle, Kurt held the crucifix out before him, illuminated by Velez's flashlight. Got any plans tomorrow night, Velez? I could use that drink you owe me from our little bet this morning. I'll buy you 2 drinks if you let me carry that to the car. I'll never see that much gold again in my life. Kurt handed her the relic. You can hold it all the way back to the station and do the honors of checking it into evidence. Lord have mercy. She cradled the crucifix in her left arm and blessed herself. It's beautiful. Just a shame 3 men had to lose their lives over it. Gives a whole different meaning to pearl of great price.